My name is Jess, and I was addicted to heroin. The first thing that I ever really got addicted to was validation. I grew up in a household where my dad was a tweaker, constantly doing meth, and then my brother, who is 12 years older than me, he was also addicted to meth and heroin. And then my mom was really addicted to weed. Every place and everything and anybody that I could get validation from. And then that kind of rolled into a lot of curiosity. I was by myself a lot. I just wanted to know why people were always temporary and why nobody was ever around, and I started getting in trouble at a really young age. The first time I got drunk, I was 11. My dad and his friends were having a Super Bowl party, and I walked across the street and they were all drinking and they had this pretty drink, and I was like, what is that? And it was a strawberry daiquiri, and they asked me if I wanted one. And mind you, these are grown adults, and I had one and I loved it, and I had another one and I was drunk. And my dad asked me, are you drunk right now? And I go, I don't know. There were no consequences. And so then I kind of thought that there was going to be no consequences from then on out. When I turned 14, I found people, the way that they lived their life, it attracted my eye because they did drugs, and I wanted to get outside of myself. So I tried ecstasy for the first time when I was 14, and then I tried weed, and then I started doing all these pills. 15, started doing hallucinogens, and then 16, coke, and 17, I met the love of my life, which was heroin, and I smoked it for 5 days straight, and then I had this epiphany of, what am I gonna do? I'm living a double life because I was a volleyball player my whole life, and in 5 days of smoking heroin, I realized I was completely addicted. I didn't know what to do. I was trying to figure out if I was going to just leave the scholarship and stay in Arizona, or if I was gonna just go out to Kansas and see what happened. And I did just that. And I ended up moving back home 2 months later and completely throwing my scholarship away and Olympic training that I was doing. Threw it away for heroin. I ended up shooting it up, and then I started experimenting with meth, which is something that I thought I would never do, especially seeing my dad and my brother doing meth together for a long time. And I ended up, robbing people. I ended up manipulating everybody and everything, burning every bridge I could possibly have. I was so delusional in my addiction that I was 19 years old, living on 28th Street in Van Buren in a sex offender's apartment complex, dating a sex offender. Did I leave? No. Why? Because he had drugs and I wanted drugs, and I didn't know what it's not that I didn't know right from wrong, but I didn't care. I was so high on crack, heroin, and meth to where I don't care what situation, what environment I'm in, I'm gonna stay there if I'm getting what I want. And it gets to a point where I'm helping a drug dealer make fake bills, and I'm flipping those fake bills to get real money. That way I can support my habit. Screwing everybody over. Sold everything that was valuable in my grandmother's house and maxed out all of her credit cards. And because of that, she's not gonna be able to retire until probably her mid-80s, and she's in her mid-70s right now. And that's because of me. I didn't care. I didn't know who I was anymore when I looked in the mirror. You just lose yourself. I didn't have any morals. I didn't have any standards. I wasn't gonna do anything for anybody unless I got something in return for it. All I cared about were my selfish needs. And that ran my life for years. And that's how I was. It turned into, I'm gotta go to rehab. My family starts catching on, and I've jumped from rehab to rehab. That was 13 rehabs, and then I ended up going to jail, which I thought was never gonna happen to me. I thought I was completely invincible from that. I thought that was just something that you saw in movies, but of course it did happen to me, because if you're gonna do a crime, you're gonna pay the time. I was lucky enough to not get a felony. Another way it looked like was I was borderline stalking women in grocery stores, and once they would turn away for a second, I would grab their wallet or their purse out of their shopping cart just so I could get my fix. And then I would book it out of there and go get high. That only lasted for so long until I got caught and had to go to jail. And by the grace of God, somehow I got that dropped. That was an eye-opener for me, but not enough to keep me away from the heroin. I've had a lot of bottoms. I've had, overdoses. And when you're sitting in a hotel room with one other person and you're freaking out on them because you can't find a vein, and the only places that you can shoot up at a certain point are in your feet and in your legs, there's no way to not be aware of that, of like, what the hell is going on? I got to a point where I had an emotional bottom. I was completely bankrupt inside my heart and soul. I wanted to be better. I knew that there was something else out there for me rather than just being a junkie. I knew there was more to life than that. So I ended up making the decision on my own this time rather than all the other times I had been to rehab. I made this decision on my own that I was gonna go get high one last time, then check myself into detox, and then I was gonna go to sober living. And that's exactly what I did. After I moved in there, I started taking suggestions, which is the one thing that I never did all the other times I tried getting sober. And I listened to everything that everybody else was saying that had more time than I did. I got a sponsor immediately, started working my steps, the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I just did the work, and I found somebody that I could be completely honest with, that I knew if I'm gonna tell you my personal business, I need to be able to trust you with it. And I ended up finding that person, and I started finding women in the fellowship because there was always a guy in the picture all these times that I tried getting sober. And this time I decided there's not gonna be a guy in the picture. I'm gonna stick with the women in this program and the ones that have what I want. So I did just that, and it ended up working out in my favor, believe it or not, which I never thought that was gonna happen for me. And after doing that, I started seeing the promises. I started finding a new freedom and a new happiness, and I started having goals and motivation and ambitions again, which I had lost so long ago, and I didn't even know what I was passionate about anymore for a really long time. The more work that I did, the more fulfilling it was, and the better I felt about myself, and I started finding self-love for myself rather than seeking it from other people like I used to when I was younger. Because I can't rely on other people for my happiness. I needed to do what was best for me and stop worrying about what everybody else wanted. I stayed in sober living for 5 months, and then I ended up getting an apartment with my current boyfriend that we worked really hard to get. This is the first time I'm 23 years old, and this is the first time I've ever lived on my own. And I worked for this, and I can sit here and say today that everything that I have, I worked for, and nobody else got me to where I am except for myself, which is the biggest accomplishment ever. I can keep a job, I have relationships with people. I'm not gonna sit here and say everything's perfect because that's not true. Life is still gonna happen, and that's okay, but I have the tools today on how to deal with life when life happens. And that's something that I never had. I never had this handbook to life that everybody else supposedly had. And I keep putting one foot in front of the other and keep trudging, and every day is better than the last. And as long as I keep my head up and try to be a better person than I was yesterday and carry the message and sponsor women and, get them to where they can find self-love for themselves too, then that's good enough for me. I never thought it would work for me, and it did, and therefore I know it's possible for other people. I doubted myself for a long time, and I was in a place where I had nothing to lose, so I gave it a shot, and here I am.